Chapter 4026. King of Darkness's chest shook for a moment. Tightly he let out a sly chuckle. Laughing and laughing. That laughter gradually became louder and louder as he laughed out loud. Small vessel. His sinister voice was like an icy cold poisonous snake as it coiled up. Following that, he moved his hand away from his chest. His figure suddenly flew towards the center of that dazzling red light. His body was encircled by a circle of profound yin qi. Just as he was flying away, along with the profound yin qi, he split open a black blade amidst the dazzling red light. The speed was extremely ferocious. Just a moment later, in the cave, two rays of light, two bursts of energy collided violently with each other. Under the excitement of King of Darkness, his momentum was extremely ferocious. When he made his move, as compared to probing, it was filled with more viciousness. After Yiqing Luo released the God Relic's energy, her body had a moment of weakness. Suddenly she saw King of Darkness flying over. Yiqing Luo's slender brows creased slightly as she felt the sinister cold wind rushing towards her. The majestic force seemed as though it was going to crush her. She took a deep breath and speedily moved her body. Right before King of Darkness charged over, her body used an extremely difficult posture as she flipped and stepped onto the side of the stone wall, which was constantly shaking and breaking. She suddenly dashed into the stone wall in the middle of the cave. The few movements seemed to be as smooth as flowing water, but it had already made Yiqing Luo's face turn paler. She leaned against the stone wall, which was engraved with exquisite murals, as she raised her head to look at King of Darkness, who had missed the injury on her shoulder, as well as the small injuries from the few times she crossed hands with King of Darkness. Adding on to the depletion of her mental power, she was afraid that she wouldn't be able to hold on for long. Even though her body had been modified and was no longer a mortal body, but she was still human and would feel tired or exhausted. Now, she could only hope that her method would be effective on King of Darkness, although she was certain that King of Darkness would not kill her. But once she fell into the hands of the secluded palace, she had no way of predicting the consequences. Even if she had something that the secluded palace, or rather, the entire upper realm's upper echelons wanted. How many times had she ruined the secluded palace's plans? The Netherworld Palace would not take her life so easily, but it would definitely make her feel worse than before. And the King of Darkness. Yiqing Luo didn't feel that the King of Darkness could be compared to the person behind the scenes in the Nether Palace. Even if the King of Darkness had his own plans in mind, Lin Yun wouldn't be able to do so. However, none of this could escape the schemes of the people behind the Dark Palace. Is your body overloaded? The King of Darkness stared unblinkingly at Yiqing Luo's pale face as he laughed coldly. The power of a God Relic is too heavy for a mortal like you. As soon as he finished speaking, Yiqing Luo only felt her cheeks turning cold. The King of Darkness blinked and stood in front of her. The distance was very close. It was so close that Yiqing Luo's fine black hair was blown by the strong wind, causing it to dance wildly. So close that the gloomy cold qi emitted from his body was so dense that it almost covered Yiqing Luo's body. Yiqing Luo raised her head and met with the King of Darkness's dark and icy cold eyes. Wisps of mysterious yin qi circulated in his pupils. It looked extremely horrifying. At this distance, it made Yiqing Luo's entire pupils were filled with the King of Darkness's icy cold face and smooth and exquisite skin. She frowned as she couldn't stand to be in close contact with any man other than Zhou Xian. Chapter 4027. Yiqing Luo's actions pleased the King of Darkness. His dark eyes overflowed with a mocking and evil smile, as though he was laughing, or as though he was ridiculing her. His body intentionally moved closer to Yiqing Luo. That posture seemed as though he was intentionally teasing Yiqing Luo to make him happy. Yiqing Luo's brows creased even tighter. Just as the icy cold aura was about to envelop her, she stretched out her hand and blocked in front of the King of Darkness's chest. Her palm had just touched the King of Darkness. Yiqing Luo felt a burst of extreme coldness as it invaded her. That was a bone-piercing chill. Her hand subconsciously shrank back. The King of Darkness stopped his body from pressing down because of Yiqing Luo's touch. When he saw the young lady's shrinking hand, his eyes flashed with an unknown emotion. Immediately, his body continued to move closer to the young lady. Yiqing Luo's back was pressed against the stone wall. The King of Darkness trapped her tightly in his space. The moment she moved, the King of Darkness's arm followed closely. As for his icy cold body, it was gradually sticking to Yiqing Luo's delicate body. At the last moment when the coldness was about to seep into her skin, Yiqing Luo had no way to avoid it. She could only raise her hand and block in front of the King of Darkness's chest, preventing him from getting closer. An extremely cold profound yin qi filled her palm. Yiqing Luo's profound energy gathered on her palms, blocking the profound yin qi from entering her body. She raised her head and met the King of Darkness's mocking gaze as she gritted her teeth. King of Darkness, your actions, can I interpret it as you are trying to seduce me? Seduce? The King of Darkness's lips curled, not understanding the meaning of the word. Yiqing Luo replied, it means you like me and want to woo me. The King of Darkness's dark eyes seemed to have a black light flowing. Following that, an exaggerated evil smile surfaced on his face. He laughed out loudly. The gaze he used to look at Yiqing Luo was as though he was looking at a joke. This king likes you. Woo you? Ha, what do you think? On what basis can you enter this king's eyes? His tone was filled with ridicule. But his body didn't have any intention to move away. Yiqing Luo didn't blush from his ridicule. She would only blush in front of Zhou Xian. Her face was expressionless as she said word by word, oh? Since you're not trying to seduce me, then what are you doing now? She deliberately lowered her eyes and glanced at his body that was so close to hers. If it wasn't for her hand blocking the distance between the two of them, he was afraid that he would directly press down on her. King of Darkness followed Yiqing Luo's gaze and looked at the distance between them. Just as Yiqing Luo thought that the King of Darkness would fly into a rage out of humiliation and swiftly distance himself from her. The King of Darkness chuckled softly. Suddenly he raised his hand and covered Yiqing Luo's hand, which was pressed against King of Darkness's chest. The icy cold touch made Yiqing Luo shiver. The touch from a stranger of the opposite sex made Yiqing Luo's face reveal an expression of resistance. She tried to break free from the King of Darkness's grip. A low and sinister voice fell beside her ear, like a bolt from the blue, striking her on the inside and tender on the outside. Oh then, this king is indeed flirting with you. Yiqing Luo. Flirting? Your grandpa's flirting. King of Darkness, your persona has collapsed, all right? Ugly reject, ugly reject. Chapter 40-28. Ha. Ha. King of Darkness's laughter rang beside her ear. Carefree and unrestrained, laughing maniacally. He let go of Yiqing Luo's hand as he retreated slightly. Yiqing Luo immediately dodged to the other side. King of Darkness hadn't laughed so heartily for a long time. This was the first time he laughed so carefree since he was sealed. Look at your expression, ha. You really treated my words seriously? King of Darkness ridiculed. Who do you think you are? How could I possibly like you? Ha ha. Yiqing Luo. Crazy snake. It was best if he didn't like her. Otherwise, if she was liked by a crazy snake, that would be a huge problem. Yiqing Luo carefully stuck close to the stone wall as she circled to the other side of the stone wall, widening the distance between her and King of Darkness. Because of the King of Darkness's sudden action and his reply, the King of Darkness's eyes widened. The murderous atmosphere between the both of them had been alleviated. But Yiqing Luo was still on her guard. After all, she was facing a crazy snake. Who knows, he might be laughing and joking with you. The next second he might be choking on your neck trying to kill you. Her little actions didn't escape King of Darkness's eyes. When he saw Yiqing Luo's figure was about to reach the other side of the stone wall, the corners of his mouth twitched coldly, and he suddenly took 2 large steps forward. He stretched out his hand and grabbed her hand, which was stuck on the stone wall. The man's icy cold fingers locked onto the young lady's arm. The force was extremely strong, and the icy coldness along with the profound yin qi kept eroding her. Yiqing Luo was about to pull her hand away. Her arm tightened and her body suddenly pulled. Her entire body was forcefully pulled and fiercely crashed into the man's embrace. As though she had crashed into an ice cube in an ice house. The coldness entered her body. It was so cold that Yiqing Luo couldn't help but shiver. What are you doing? Yiqing Luo's face was hurting from the impact as she raised her head and reprimanded King of Darkness with an ugly expression. Before she could finish her words, The hand which was locked onto her arm suddenly exerted more force. That force was so strong that she cried out in pain. She had just raised her head. The man in front of her suddenly staggered a step backwards. His hand still gripped her arm tightly. His other hand moved away from her waist and slowly pressed on her chest. His face alternated between green and white, looking extremely strange. Yiqing Luo wanted to withdraw her hand. However, the King of Darkness tightened her grip. It was so tight that a few wrinkles appeared between her brows. What trick was this lunatic trying to pull? Yiqing Luo's pink lips pursed tightly as her half-squinted eyes refracted a cold glint, meeting his gaze. But she only saw the man's dark eyes slowly widen. There was a look of disbelief in his eyes. "It's you," the man opened his thin lips slightly and spat out a word. Then with a wah sound, a large mouthful of black blood overflowed from the corner of his mouth. Yes, black blood. It was not the mysterious Yin-Chi that made it look like black blood. And it was indeed true, he spat out black blood. The black, sticky blood dripped onto his robe. The King of Darkness's body started to stagger, as though it was difficult for him to even stand properly. Yiqing Luo's gaze landed on the sticky liquid beside the King of Darkness's mouth. Her eyes suddenly lit up. It was the poison which she had given to the King of Darkness had taken effect. That's right. Poison. This was the first time she had used her teleportation secret art. She had intentionally made a fake movement to make the King of Darkness's eyes to mislead him into thinking that she was trying to sneak an attack on him. Chapter 4029. That poison was called Profound Pill. It was an upgraded version that she and Ghost Doctor had developed through the Profound Medicine Soup. The effect of the Profound Medicine Soup was targeted at cultivators. Once the soup entered the stomach, it would dissolve the cultivator's profound chi within 4 hours, rendering him unable to use his profound energy. And the Profound Pill was the upgraded version of the Profound Medicine Soup. Once it was swallowed, it would instantly dissolve the profound chi in the cultivator's body. Especially, the more the cultivator wanted to use his profound energy, the greater the reaction and the deeper the rebound would be. It was impossible for the King of Darkness to swallow the Profound Pill. So Yiqing Luo made use of the first time she executed her teleportation secret art, which was when her shoulder was injured by the King of Darkness's aftershock. She took the opportunity to crush the Profound Pill, using the powder of the Profound Pill through her profound energy. This allowed the King of Darkness to inhale the Nonxian Pill's powder into his body. This was the reason why Yiqing Luo kept provoking the King of Darkness, infuriating him to make a move against her. After all, the King of Darkness wasn't poisoned by the normal method of swallowing the Profound Pill. After probing it again and again, Yiqing Luo thought that the Profound Pill had no effect on the King of Darkness and her plan was going to fail. She had not expected. The Profound Pill was a success. Yiqing Luo swiftly grabbed the King of Darkness's hand and pulled his hand away from hers. Yiqing Luo, don't even think of escaping. The King of Darkness, who was spitting out a mouthful of black blood, stared at her coldly. Even though his body was in immense pain, the strength in his hand was shockingly huge. Furthermore, he bore with the pain as he released his majestic profound energy, and the hand which was pressing on his chest suddenly slammed down towards Yiqing Luo's chest. When his palm slammed down, Yi Shiwen's eyes widened. The black blood in his mouth started to spurt out even more violently. Even his eyes, nose and ears were oozing out a large amount of sticky liquid. The poison that the King of Darkness was inflicted with was the Profound Pill. The more he used his profound energy, the stronger the profound chi undulations. He would be in even more pain. Or worse, it would cause a backlash from his body. But the King of Darkness didn't care. He only knew his pain. This young lady in front of him who poisoned him must repay him 100 times. When the King of Darkness's palm landed, the King of Darkness's eyes widened. Yiqing Luo was actually on her guard. However, vigilance was useless. The King of Darkness was determined to make her suffer as well. This palm strike had practically exhausted all of the King of Darkness' remaining strength. Furthermore, the King of Darkness's hand was tightly gripping her arm. There was no way he could dodge the King of Darkness' palm. Yiqing Luo could only turn sideways to avoid the vital parts. The remaining power of the palm wind surged in all directions. Yiqing Luo's evasion was also extremely close to the palm wind. The aftershock vibrated and struck Yiqing Luo's body. She gave a muffled grunt. Her delicate back slammed heavily against the stone wall. The intricately carved mural lines were branded on her back. It hurt a little. It was also a little hot and scalding. Wait a minute. Boiling hot. How could this stone wall be boiling hot? This thought flashed across his mind. By the side of her ear, King of Darkness's astonished bellow rang. Yi Qing Luo. Then her body suddenly felt light. It was as if the stone wall behind her had suddenly disappeared and she fell backwards. Then it continued to fall, falling, her body seemed to be floating in the air and she continued to fall. Chapter 40-30. The King of Darkness looked at his empty hand in disbelief. He suppressed the pain in his body and the feeling of weakness. Following that, his vision fell onto the stone wall which was engraved with exquisite murals. What happened just now? He was obviously grabbing onto Yi Qing Luo. But at the next moment the stone wall suddenly emitted a ray of light. In the middle of the stone wall, a huge light hole appeared out of nowhere. Yi Qing Luo fell into the light hole right in front of his eyes. He wanted to chase after her. But the moment he touched the light hole, what he touched was a solid stone wall. That ray of light also dissipated. Everything in front of him returned to normal. Only Yi Qing Luo's disappearance proved that everything earlier wasn't an illusion. What was this? King of Darkness's face darkened as he raised his hand and pressed it against the stone wall. He felt around. But he didn't discover anything strange on the stone wall. He couldn't find the reason why the light hole appeared and why Yi Qing Luo disappeared. And at this moment Yi Qing Luo, who had lost all support, was still falling. Her ears were filled with the howling of the wind. Her falling speed was extremely fast. It was so fast that the surrounding scenery disappeared in a flash. Yi Qing Luo couldn't see her surroundings clearly. She could only confirm this was still a cave, because she could faintly see the uneven stone wall. And the sky was filled with red light. Just at this moment, her falling body suddenly lightened. Instantly she turned into a feather, floating lightly. His body, which had been lying in mid-air, slowly stood up. Then his body, which was as graceful as a feather, slowly and steadily landed on the ground. Just like the moment when she was falling. There was a mysterious force that eased the resistance of her fall and allowed her to stand on the ground unscathed. This situation. It was similar to the last time when Chu Wu Xin poisoned her and made her unconscious for 2 days. This feeling of falling into the abyss without any support was really uncomfortable. Last time she was in a daze and knew that she was in a coma. The fall of her soul. But this time it was totally different. This time it wasn't unconscious, nor was it an illusion. She had really fallen from the sky and landed in this unknown place. Yi Qing Luo suppressed the shock and disbelief in her heart as her eyes speedily surveyed the surroundings. He had to first confirm what this place was. Also, that mysterious power just now, was it friend or foe? But when Yi Qing Luo's vision surveyed the surroundings, she was completely dumbfounded. The surroundings were filled with a thin mist. This fog was not the usual white fog. Instead it was a faint red mist. It was as if there was a faint flame burning in the surroundings. Her charming eyes were coated with a faint layer of red light. This strange mist made Yi Qing Luo hold her breath in vigilance. He couldn't be sure of the safety of the mist. Yi Qing Luo surveyed her surroundings. He didn't discover any other living beings or auras in the surroundings. In the end she focused her attention on the mist. Girl, this isn't mist. In her mind, Old Man Song's slightly excited voice suddenly came. This is Azure Water True Qi. It's very useful to you. Azure Water True Qi? This was the first time Yi Qing Luo heard of this term. Old Man Song's body sprang out from the Azure Dew bracelet. Chapter 40-31. He circled around Yi Qing Luo's head several times. Could be seen that Old Man Song was really excited. He looked ahead without blinking at the red mist in the sky and explained, Vast Aqua True Qi is different from the usual heaven and earth Qi. This kind of true Qi is purer than heaven and earth Qi and is more suitable for a physique like yours. Old Man Song stretched out his hands. The faint red mist that filled the sky circled around him and seeped into his body. The light red light intersected with Old Man Song's white velvet light. It made his whole body seem to be covered with a layer of holy light. Seeing Old Man Song's action, Yi Qing Luo also slowly stretched out a hand and tried to summon the red mist. Just as she moved her hand, she felt a chill run down her spine. The mist floating in the air surged up. Due to the movement of the mist, the air seemed to have become somewhat viscous. However, when the faint red mist entered his body, she only felt that her whole body was like it was washed, relaxed and without the slightest tiredness. A trace of shock emerged in her eyes. Vast aqua true chi is very difficult to form, I didn't expect. There is such a big treasure land here that nurtures vast aqua true chi. Old man Song looked towards Yiqing Luo and explained to the young girl. Yiqing Luo, what are the conditions to form vast aqua true chi? First, it needs the divine power of the vast aqua divine weapon, plus a drop of blood of the Emperor of God as a medium. Then with the spirit gathering array, it needs to be nurtured for hundreds of years, even thousands of years. There is a 50% chance of forming true chi. Vast aqua divine weapon? The blood of the Emperor of God? These two sentences made Yiqing Luo's eyes suddenly brighten. She remembered correctly. She seemed to have crashed into the exquisite mural that was carved with the Emperor of God and the vast aqua divine weapon. Then, she lost her support and fell straight down. And the direction of her fall seemed to be that stone wall. In other words, she fell into that stone wall. This huge place filled with vast aqua true chi was the inside of the stone wall. This guess made Yiqing Luo's heart palpitate even faster. Her guesses were all right. In other words, the mural on the stone wall of the cave was really related to the Divine Emperor. It was not the same stone wall as the one he saw when he was trapped in the headquarters of the Dark Palace in the Nirvana realm by the person behind the scenes of the Dark Palace. The stone wall in Tenyu Palace was fake. And this piece was real. But why was she able to enter the stone wall that was carved with the Divine Emperor's monarch? Logically speaking, if the carvings of the Divine Emperor and the vast water divine weapon were real, then there would definitely be a protective barrier set up. She fell into the stone wall. Where was the King of Darkness? He who was already poisoned also followed them in? But in this space, Yiqing Luo didn't sense anyone else's presence other than her. Last Luo, calm your heart and absorb the azure aqua chi. This is something that can only be encountered by chance and not sought. Old man Song saw that Yiqing Luo was standing there in a daze, so he opened his mouth to urge her. Yiqing Luo returned to her senses and looked at old man Song. The faint red mist was getting thicker and thicker. Everything in front of him seemed to be covered with a faint layer of red. In her eyes, there was a faint red light flickering. She slowly stretched out both her hands again, accepting the surrounding azure aqua chi. Chapter 40-32. As Yiqing Luo accepted the azure aqua true chi into her body, she asked old man Song. Just now you said the conditions to form the azure aqua true chi. One is the azure aqua artifact, and the second is a drop of blood from the Emperor of God, right? Old man Song, yes. Yiqing Luo, that is to say, this place has a third azure water god relic? Old man Song was silent for a long time. Then, as if he suddenly reacted, he abruptly withdrew his hand and slapped his leg. That's right, why didn't this old man think of this? There's an azure water divine artifact here. A place that could form azure water true chi was bound to have an azure water divine artifact. In the Nirvana realm, Yiqing Luo had obtained the azure aqua ring and azure aqua silk chain, these two divine weapons. After that, they didn't sense the presence of the vast water divine artifact anywhere else. Unexpectedly, the third vast water divine artifact was actually in the earth domain. After exchanging blows with the King of Darkness, the King of Darkness wasn't the only one who was poisoned. It had even fallen into the array formation that had formed the azure water true chi, and there was also the whereabouts of the third azure water divine tool. His luck was unparalleled. Thinking about the existence of the azure water divine artifact, Yiqing Luo immediately stood up. She scanned her surroundings. The misty light red color shrouded everything in the distance. This place looks like a piece of flat land within 100 miles. She lowered her eyes, her slender fingers stroking the azure water ring. These two divine artifacts didn't produce any reaction. The azure water divine artifact was a set type. Generally speaking, as long as the vast water divine weapon got close, it wouldn't be able to escape. There will be a reaction. However, in this space that was neither too big nor too small, Yiqing Luo had not sensed anything at all. Because of this, she waited for Old Man Tsong to explain the conditions for the formation of Azure True Qi before she realized that there might be a divine artifact here. Old Man Tsong also floated up and circled around Yiqing Luo. Look around, there might be other passages. The man and the spirit body chose a random direction and walked forward. As they walked, one man and one spirit body absorbed the surrounding azure water True Qi. Yiqing Luo's injuries from the battle with the King of Darkness had gradually healed after the cleansing of her qi. They walked for about a quarter of an hour. There was no path ahead. In front of him was an uneven rock wall. She reached out and touched it. He didn't notice anything strange. Furthermore, the two divine artifacts in his hands did not react at all. Yiqing Luo led Old Man Tsong around the rock wall and walked one round around the entire space. There were no secret passages on the rock walls, nor any other passageways. Moreover, the divine artifact did not react at all. Yiqing Luo stopped and sat on the ground to rest. Could it be that there are no divine weapons here? Last time the azure water ring had sensed the azure water chain. Even though he was far away, he could already sense it. If this space really had a vast water artifact, why didn't the two divine artifacts in his hands react at all? Where there's azure water true energy, there's definitely an azure water divine weapon. Old Man Tsong solemnly shook his head, his face also filled with confusion. To be able to form such pure and dense azure water true qi, it's impossible to not have the support of an azure water divine tool. The most important aspect of forming an azure water divine tool is that there must be an azure water divine tool. The vast water divine weapon, the blood of the divine sovereign, the spirit gathering formation. These 3 points were the prerequisites for forming azure water true qi. No matter which one was missing, it was impossible to form azure water true qi. Chapter 40-33. If she could confirm the existence of the azure water artifact in this space. But her artifact couldn't sense it. This meant her direction wasn't right. She had already walked one round in the entire space and hadn't found anything. Just where did the problem lie? Let's take a break first and absorb this qi before moving. Old Man Tsong saw Yiqing Luo sitting on the ground without any intention of moving, so he floated to the ground. He sat cross-legged and began to absorb the surrounding qi into his body. The azure water qi was a fatal temptation to Old Man Tsong, who was the artifact spirit of the azure dew bracelet. It was like a person who had been starving for a long time. Suddenly, a large portion of his favorite and most delicious food appeared in front of him. There was no way to refuse. Yiqing Luo saw Old Man Tsong's serious attitude of absorbing the true qi and agreed to his suggestion. She still had no clue. Let Old Man Tsong have a good meal. She also took advantage of the time she absorbed the qi to think about the specific location of the third artifact. One person and one spiritual body sat cross-legged on the ground. She didn't know how long had passed. Yiqing Luo opened her eyes in a carefree state. She had to admit that the azure water qi had a great effect on both her and Old Man Tsong. Although it wasn't enough to let her advance to the profound grade. But it also strengthened her body's most basic physique. Let her body and mind be cleansed. Being able to cleanse people's hearts was the biggest effect. Using Old Man Tsong's words to explain, this azure water true qi was also not suitable for everyone to absorb. For example, the few cuties in her pet space didn't want to come out. Old Man Tsong was suitable because he was the artifact spirit of the azure dew bracelet. After all, the 5-piece azure water divine artifact set had been forged after the azure dew bracelet was forged. Quite a few more materials had been obtained, and thus the 5-piece azure water divine artifact set had been forged. As for her, it might be because she had the divine phoenix profound heart jade and also contracted with 2 artifacts, so she could be considered as the chosen master of the artifacts. Therefore, the azure water qi didn't reject her. Yiqing Luo stood up and saw Old Man Tsong still had his eyes closed and was seriously absorbing the azure water qi. She didn't disturb him. She would wake Old Man Tsong after she had a clue to find the third artifact. She didn't know what was going on outside. Zhou Xian must have been worried sick when he saw her being dragged away by the vines. She had to think of a way to find the divine artifact and leave this space as soon as possible. Yiqing Luo cast her vision towards the surroundings. The surrounding azure water true qi continued to spread throughout the entire space. From bottom to top, from left to right, or from right to left, no matter which angle one looked at it from. The sky was filled with a faint red mist. The pale mist seemed very thin. Because she and Old Man Song had been absorbing for a long period of time, their true energy hadn't gradually decreased. Suddenly Yiqing Luo's gaze fixed on a certain spot. Then his gaze shifted to Old Man Song. The expression on her face suddenly froze. His gaze alternated between that spot and Old Man Song's body a few times. It wasn't an illusion. The vast expanses of azure true qi here. They didn't seem to be wandering around in a disorderly manner, or perhaps they were spontaneously gathering towards Old Man Song, who was currently absorbing. Instead, it was very orderly and it was pacing back and forth continuously. She found out, azure water true qi was surging forth from all directions. Its true location. Chapter 40-34. Bang bang bang. The deafening cracking sound shook the entire space. The ground shook violently. Could be said to be shaking the earth and mountains. Yiqing Luo was unable to maintain her balance. But what made her surprised was, no matter how much this space shook, the surrounding rock walls didn't have any signs of being shaken. Not even a bit of gravel. Seeing this scene, Yiqing Luo could almost confirm the guess in her heart. Her fingers tightened again. Immediately, a dazzling profound light enveloped her fist. A punch fell again. The entire space shook even more violently. The rumbling sound of collapsing echoed in her ears. The faint red deep water true qi in the surroundings also began to swim uncontrollably in all directions. Wah wah wah, Luo lass, what are you doing? Old Man Song was still in a meditative state when he was suddenly flung out due to the shaking of the ground. Even if he was in a spiritual state, this fling he would still have some reaction. After he opened his eyes, the first feeling was the earth shaking and mountains shaking. His weak spiritual body was sent flying back and forth from the impact. In his ears, there was a deafening explosion sound. And in the sky full of red mist, Old Man Song saw Yiqing Luo punching a certain rock wall. The blossoming profound light was extremely dazzling. Old Man Song's spiritual body floated towards Yiqing Luo. As soon as it neared, a crack suddenly appeared in front of her. An intense aura surged out from the crack and assaulted them. Old Man Song was shaken by this sudden force and his entire spiritual body was flung out. What's going on? Old Man Song was hit by this force and struggled to support the rock wall to avoid the surging waves and looked at Yiqing Luo. Until the force surging out of the crack stopped. Yiqing Luo then slowly approached the crack and said, "The real spirit gathering formation should be here." She pointed to the crack in front. In other words, the azure divine weapon is here. Wah, what? Old Man Song was stunned and couldn't understand Yiqing Luo's words. When I was absorbing the azure water true qi just now, I noticed that the true qi was orderly and continuously lingering around this area. Yiqing Luo spoke of her own guess. So, I followed the direction where the azure aqua qi lingered and found this place. She slowly placed her hand on the gap. The light coming from the other side of the gap was blinding. It was as if everything was covered by a faint red mist. She could not see clearly what was happening on the other side. She closed her eyes slightly. The profound light burst forth once again. A dazzling profound glow burst out from Yiqing Luo's body. The vigorous power collided with the crack. As the earth shook and the mountains shook, the commotion became more and more intense. The crack suddenly split open. The gap between the cracks wasn't big, but it was just enough for Yiqing Luo alone to enter through this crack. Old Man Song listened to Yiqing Luo's explanation in a daze, and looked at her actions. Until Yiqing Luo walked into the crevice. He still didn't understand what was going on. Seeing that Yiqing Luo had already entered the other end of the fissure. Old Man Song's spiritual body swayed and immediately floated to Yiqing Luo's side. "Lass Luo, what is this place? You said the divine weapon is here, what's going on?" His voice just fell. The red mist in the surroundings surged over. Everything in front of them was dyed by the faint red mist. Chapter 40-35. From the looks of it, there wasn't much difference from the space they were in before. But Old Man Song's originally puzzled pupils suddenly contracted. The expression on his face, little by little, became solemn and dignified. Different. The vast aqua qi here was obviously different from the outside space. Previously he kept saying how pure and rich the vast aqua qi was, and how it made people feel carefree. But after feeling the vast aqua qi here, Old Man Song then knew. What was called true purity rich. If I didn't guess wrongly, that space should be an illusion. Yiqing Luo explained, just now when I found the real spirit gathering array, the entire space was shaking, but the surroundings didn't have a single piece of gravel falling. The earth shook, swaying endlessly, and all kinds of collapsing explosions could be heard. How could there not be a single piece of gravel? The only explanation was only that place was fake. Everything they saw was an illusion, an illusion. If it was a timid person. After feeling the earth shake, all kinds of collapses. Either they left like they were fleeing, or they were scared to death by the illusion. Yiqing Luo slowly raised her hand, the corners of her mouth slightly hooked. Old man Tsong look. Following Yiqing Luo's line of sight. Only to see her raised hand. There was a ring on his fingertip and there was a small flame that looked like it was burning. And on her wrist, that red silk chain also glowed with a red light. Between the vast aqua divine weapons. Response. Old man Tsong saw the changes of the two divine weapons, and a trace of surprise appeared on his face. Yes. Response. The vast aqua divine weapon had a response. This also meant. Here there was indeed the existence of the vast aqua divine weapon. Old man Tsong was obviously excited. No wonder we couldn't find the whereabouts of the vast aqua divine weapon. It was hidden here. Yiqing Luo looked down at the vast aqua ring and vast aqua silk chain. Tightly, her fingertips stroked above. She lifted her feet and followed the response of the divine weapons. The mist around them continued to spread. If it wasn't for the fact that the color was very, very light, there really was a feeling of blood mist pervading. Because of the richness of the azure aqua chi, Yiqing Luo could only see clearly in front of her, within a range of about 20 meters. He followed his senses and walked forward for a long time. Layer after layer of deep water true chi was pushed aside. A faintly discernible shadow gradually appeared in front of him. The reaction of the ring and the silk chain was also getting stronger. The divine artifact was right there. As Yiqing Luo got closer, in the faint red mist, that figure slowly appeared in front of Yiqing Luo. It was a tall stone wall. It was rectangular and radiated with a pure and holy velvet light. As she got closer, Yiqing Luo could see the exquisite murals carved on the stone walls. It was almost the same as the stone wall in the cave outside. It was a mural of the Divine Emperor. A mural of the vast water divine artifact. On top of that there was a complicated and mysterious totem. The only difference was that this stone wall was a type of jade that was almost translucent and sparkling. Upon closer inspection one could see that the sacred velvet light that shrouded the murals was not emitted by the stone walls. Instead, it was the exquisitely carved murals on the stone walls. Every line emitted a faint velvet glow. He just looked at her. It gave people a feeling of holiness and beauty. She would come to this place. It was precisely because of that stone wall in the cave that allowed her to enter the interior of the stone wall. Actually, this mural in front of her was the real stone wall, right? Chapter 4036. The Emperor of Divine Emperors. Old man Tsong's voice was also unable to conceal his excitement. He widened his eyes and looked at the stone wall in front of him. There's the aura of the Divine Emperor on it. Yiqing Luo's vision looked up and down the stone wall, and the vast water god relic is also in this stone wall. The conditions for the formation of azure water true chi were divine artifacts and the blood of divine emperors. The divine weapon was inside the stone wall. The blood of the divine emperor must be in the stone wall. It was normal for the stone wall to have the aura of a divine emperor. Yiqing Luo's gaze finally fell onto the mural, that graceful human figure mural. Compared to the previous two stone walls, this mural was much more lifelike. From these murals, one could see that the emperor of the divine emperor was an outstanding celestial being. For some reason, when his eyes met the eyes of the divine emperor carved on the mural, Lin Mengya's heart trembled. Yiqing Luo's heart suddenly jolted. It was as if he had been violently shaken by something. His heart couldn't stop beating wildly. The pair of eyes on the mural was clearly carved out. But it gave Yiqing Luo a feeling that she was looking into his eyes. That pair of eyes seemed to be alive. It was sending her some kind of message. It also felt like it was calling out to her. Little girl. Little girl. Beside his ear, old man Tsong's somewhat indistinct voice called out. She couldn't hear it clearly. His eyes reflected the mural in front of him. Suddenly Yiqing Luo's arm was abruptly burned by something. A burning sensation spread across her arm. She was in pain and her dazed eyes instantly regained their brightness. Lowering her eyes, she looked at the scorching area. It was the azure dew bracelet. It was releasing energy. Circles of light that resembled electric currents jumped about in excitement. Old song. She blinked her eyes. She didn't quite understand why the azure dew bracelet had gone out of control. At some unknown time, Old Man Song had burrowed into the azure dew bracelet. In her mind, Old Man Song's voice came with a sigh of relief. "You little girl, what happened just now? It's like you've lost your soul. No matter how I call you, you won't respond." Just now. Yiqing Luo frowned as she tried to recall what had happened earlier. Wasn't it just standing here and looking at the murals? Did Old Man Song call her? There seemed to be. It was just that he was too engrossed in looking at the murals and didn't pay attention to it. Yiqing Luo thought in this way. Suddenly his eyes widened. Her eyes, which were as bright as stars, overflowed with shock. No, that's not right. No matter how entranced she was by the murals, she would never ignore Old Man Song. Furthermore, he wouldn't be uncertain if Old Man Song had called out to her. Old Man Song. Yiqing Luo's voice sounded a little tense. Old Song was still in the azure dew bracelet. What's wrong? Yiqing Luo tightened her fingers. This mural seems to be able to seduce people's hearts. Just now, I seem to have lost my consciousness because of the Emperor of Gods on this mural. Old Man Song was slightly startled and didn't speak for a long time. He sensed that something was wrong with Yiqing Luo. Thus, he had specially returned to the azure dew bracelet. Making use of the soul contract between the azure dew bracelet and Yiqing Luo, he awakened her from the depths of her soul. But unexpectedly, there was something wrong with her just now. It was because of the murals on the stone walls. Yiqing Luo didn't urge Old Man Song to answer. After a moment of silence, Old Man Song slowly came out from the azure dew bracelet. On his face was a kind of very complicated, very strange expression. Chapter 40-37. Just now, what did you see on the stone wall? Old Man Song asked. Then he thought of something and added, what I'm referring to is, what do you think you saw after you lost consciousness? Yiqing Luo knitted her brows tightly, her mind constantly searching for the memories just now. But she felt that the memory was exceptionally blurry. She couldn't even remember the details of the mural clearly. She pursed her lips and thought for a while. I was just studying the mural, wanting to know where to get the exact location of the vast water artifact. But later, speaking to this point, Yiqing Luo stopped. She thought for a long time. But in her memory it was all hazy and blurry. She scratched her head. In her mind, a pair suddenly appeared, jet black like the stars in the night, resplendent glass-like eyes. Quiet and gentle, elegant and gentle. It seemed to contain indescribable, inexhaustible deep feelings. That pair of eyes flashed across her mind for a moment. Yiqing Luo suddenly felt an inexplicable shock in her body and mind. She licked her lips and answered, yes. I just saw the eyes on the mural. It's the eyes. It was that pair of eyes that seemed to be able to hook people's souls. Let her only meet those eyes for a moment. Then she was a little absent-minded. This kind of situation rarely appeared. With the wisdom of 2 lifetimes, very few people could shake her willpower. That pair of eyes seemed to really exist on the stone wall. Eyes. After Old Man Song heard Yiqing Luo's answer, the expression on his face became more and more solemn. He stared at Yiqing Luo for a long time. Suddenly, his figure floated and his spiritual body was close to the stone wall. His height was exactly the same as that pair of eyes on the stone wall. He only looked for a few breaths. Old Man Song quickly retracted his gaze and bowed towards the direction of the mural, as if apologizing for his rude behavior. After doing all this, Old Man Song looked at Yiqing Luo. Las Luo, do you believe me? Yiqing Luo's gaze wandered between the stone wall and Old Man Song, vaguely understanding something. She didn't hesitate and nodded. I do. Old Man Song was the first person she truly trusted since she came to this strange world. She had said it countless times. Old Man Song was her elder. Since he chose to live and die together with Old Man Song, how could she not believe him? Even though she was very clear in her heart that Old Man Song had concealed many things from her. Listening to Yiqing Luo's reply, the expression on Old Man Song's face changed slightly. Then he continued in a serious and solemn voice, "Drip your blood on these eyes." Yiqing Luo was stunned for a moment before she understood Old Man Song's meaning. "You're saying, the stone wall's eye is the key to unlocking this spirit-gathering array?" "Yes." Old Man Song replied, "You reacted to the pair of eyes on the mural, which means that the power hidden within those eyes is extremely great." Yiqing Luo nodded in understanding. He raised his hand without the slightest hesitation. The devouring flame fan swept past his fingertips. 2 drops of blood dripped onto the pair of eyes in the mural. When he dripped his blood onto the pair of eyes, his eyes trembled. Yiqing Luo wanted to look at that pair of eyes to ascertain the position of the eyes. And this one glance. Yiqing Luo suddenly felt a trembling feeling assaulting her. Immediately after, there was a sharp pain in her fingers. His finger, which was pressed against the stone wall, felt as if it had been bitten by something. Chapter 40:38. She hadn't had the time to see what was going on with the stone wall. She had just raised her head. What greeted him was the surging red mist. It wasn't the light mist of the azure water chi, but it was so thick that apart from a patch of red, it was still a patch of red mist. In a split second it had already blurred her eyes. And then, she clearly felt that the red mist had completely wrapped her up. There was a burning feeling. She wanted to open her eyes and struggle. But her body seemed to be bound by an unknown force. She couldn't move at all. At this moment, Old Man Song, who was standing beside the stone wall, saw everything in front of him clearly. He personally saw the girl dripping blood onto the stone wall's eyes. He personally saw the eyes on the stone wall surging with thick red mist and enveloping Yiqing Luo. He didn't stop her. He even took a few steps back. His eyes were tightly staring at the figure in the red mist. On his face, there was a worried expression and he was trying his best to restrain himself. Yiqing Luo's eyes were tightly shut. She didn't know how long the feeling of being bound had lasted. She only knew, she tried to use her mental power to struggle and caused her body to fall into a state of fatigue. The red mist that lingered around her gradually dissipated. The feeling of being bound also gradually subsided. Her body was gently placed on the ground by the red mist. Her body had just touched the ground. Her limbs could just move. Yiqing Luo bounced back almost instantly and flipped up from the ground. This movement also caused her head to feel a sharp pain as if it was being torn apart. Her mental power had been used up too much, exceeding the body's load, reminding her to rest. Yiqing Luo suppressed the pain in her head and slowly stood up, quickly looking around vigilantly. The scene in front of her. But it made Yiqing Luo stunned. In front of her, it wasn't the kind of space that was completely enveloped by the azure water chi. But it was a huge and magnificent graveyard that was above the void. Yes, graveyard. The place where she was standing was the entrance to the graveyard. The entrance that was suspended in midair. Surrounding this target was a sky that was almost purplish-black in color. It was as if a purplish-black ink was used to dye the entire sky. It set off this gloomy and treacherous purplish-black color in all directions. Yiqing Luo looked around and all she could see was this color. It was very depressing. Yiqing Luo took a few steps forward. He stuck his head out to look at the bottom of the graveyard. It was also a deep purplish-black color. At a glance, large patches of purplish-black seemed to distort. Yiqing Luo paid careful attention. These large patches of purplish-black were not fixed. Instead they were like clouds drifting slowly one by one. When he looked down, occasionally the peaks of a few mountains could be seen. Yiqing Luo retracted her line of sight and shifted her gaze to the front. This huge and hair-raising graveyard. This graveyard was not as dark and gloomy as he had imagined, filled with all kinds of bones. On the contrary, it looked like an old castle. In a castle under the treacherous, gloomy purplish-black sky. That stone wall, why did it bring her to this graveyard? Could it be the third azure water divine artifact? Was it in this graveyard? Yiqing Luo slowly walked towards the cemetery. Raising his hand, he tried to push open the stone gate at the entrance of the graveyard. But no matter how hard she tried, the stone door remained motionless. She frowned, not understanding the situation in front of her. Old Man Song made her use her fresh blood to open the enchantment on the stone wall. Chapter 40:39. Why was it that she couldn't even enter this tomb now? Or perhaps, what other operations were needed to open the tomb entrance stone door? Yiqing Luo walked around the stone door and sized it up. She even used her hands to touch everywhere to see if there were any mechanisms. But after fumbling around for a while, nothing was found. This made Yiqing Luo very puzzled. She stopped her hand movements and sat down leaning against the stone door. She raised her head and carefully scanned every inch of the stone door. After that, she looked at the surroundings of the stone door. Around the stone door there were complicated carvings. The entire tomb, every place, seemed to be meticulously piled up and carved. This tomb was really quite big. At one glance she couldn't see the outline of the tomb, nor could she see the whole tomb. Such a huge tomb, and it was suspended in mid-air. Yiqing Luo was very curious. How on earth was this tomb supported, stabilized in mid-air? All kinds of questions lingered in Yiqing Luo's heart. She sat for a while. Her mind couldn't think of any useful information. She must think of a way to get the third divine relic as soon as possible and leave the stone wall. She couldn't keep wasting time here. The longer the time dragged, the more worried Zhou Xian would be. Everyone would also be worried about her and upset. Yiqing Luo stretched her waist and was preparing to stand up again to continue looking for the azure water divine relic. Her finger suddenly felt a tingling. She raised her hand to take a look. The cut on her finger, probably because she had knocked against the tomb's stone door, the wound had split open again. She touched her finger but didn't put it to heart. But she didn't discover. When her finger knocked against the stone door, blood gushed out and fell on the stone door. But in the blink of an eye, it disappeared into the stone door. When Yiqing Luo stood up, the azure water ring and azure water chain suddenly produced a huge reaction. It was in her hand, constantly vibrating. Even her hand followed the vibration. The azure water divine relic's reaction made Yiqing Luo stunned. She looked at her hand and the azure water ring and silk chain that were releasing energy. Her eyes suddenly lit up. This was the reaction between the divine relic. Through this reaction she could quickly find the third azure water divine relic. Yiqing Luo immediately concentrated, maintaining a spiritual connection with the azure dew ring and the silk chain that were vibrating in her hands. Suddenly her feet felt light. His feet stepped on air. Then he activated the falling mode. However, the fall this time was not as long as before. In the blink of an eye, she fell to the ground. The surrounding scenery transformed into a space filled with white fog. What attracted Yiqing Luo's attention was the stone bench in the middle of the space, which was flickering with a faint red glow. The light was indeed very weak. But in this vast expanse of whiteness, no matter how weak that red light was, it was extremely eye-catching. Yiqing Luo walked over. The closer they got, the light grew brighter. And the reaction of the two divine artifacts in his hands was also greater. Yiqing Luo only stopped when she was 3 steps away from the stone bench. The white jade bench was smooth and exuded a bit of cold air. Placed atop the stone bench was a palm-sized jade pendant. The jade pendant was in the shape of a cherry blossom, decorated with a red thread similar to the azure water chain. The jade pendant was a transparent red color. Like a red watery light rippled on the jade pendant. Every petal was extremely exquisite. Traces of red light emitted out. Chapter 40. Yiqing Luo didn't head up immediately to pick up that piece of jade pendant. The third piece of god relic was hidden too deeply. Layers and layers of traps. It was obvious that it didn't want anyone to know the whereabouts of this piece of jade pendant. Yiqing Luo naturally wouldn't be so silly as to leave. The stone stool which the jade pendant was placed on was emitting an intimidating pressure. If she went forward rashly, she would probably be attacked by the aura surrounding the stone stool. She pursed her lips tightly as she looked down at the ring and silk chain in her hands. These two pieces of god relic kept on vibrating, as though it was trying to drag her towards the direction of the jade pendant. Yiqing Luo raised her hand and suppressed the agitation of the god relic. She raised her eyes slightly as she looked at the jade pendant which kept on tempting her. She remembered, just like when she was battling with the King of Darkness. The King of Darkness had once told her, her divine phoenix profound heart jade was a radar to locate the god relic, and the key to get the vast aqua divine relic. If she used the divine phoenix profound heart jade's energy, would she be able to get the jade pendant? This thought arose in Yiqing Luo's heart and made her eager to try. She didn't have the time to continue delaying. The blood-colored fog which lingered in the surroundings became thicker and thicker. It almost swallowed her whole. Ever since she fell into the stone wall during the battle with the King of Darkness, the scenery she saw kept on changing. She wasn't sure if the scenery and environment in front of her was real or fake. She wasn't sure if she would change into another environment in the next moment. Which meant the third vast aqua divine relic had just passed by. Yiqing Luo didn't hesitate as her slender fingers slowly pressed on her heart. She closed her eyes. She started to release the divine phoenix profound heart jade's energy. The alluring red glow slowly seeped into her palm, which was at her heart. Following that, the glow slowly grew bigger. It started to stretch out towards the stone stool, which was 3 steps away. Which was the moment when Yiqing Luo released the divine phoenix profound heart jade's energy. The thick red mist in the surroundings suddenly rose into the air. It was actually heading towards Yiqing Luo's divine phoenix profound heart jade's energy. Directly intertwined with that energy. When the two forces collided, Lin Fan's eyes widened. Yiqing Luo suddenly opened her eyes. An indescribable emotion surged in his heart. What kind of feeling was that? It was as if the divine phoenix profound heart jade that had been released from her body had found its home. It had found the feeling of home. The surging red mist was completely compatible with the power of the divine phoenix profound heart jade. As they intertwined with each other, they fused together in a short moment. Yiqing Luo had also discovered it. The stone bench that originally held the jade pendant was shrouded in layers of red mist, and it actually merged with the divine phoenix profound heart jade. The power of the divine phoenix profound heart jade was connected to her heart and also to her soul. When the two powers fused, Yiqing Luo suddenly felt a huge surge of energy surging into her body. It was as if her body was suddenly stuffed with something. In an instant he felt a sharp pain from the swelling. Yiqing Luo let out a muffled groan as her 5 fingers clasped the front of her chest. She furrowed her brows. Suppressing the weird feeling in his body, he raised his head to look at the jade pendant. The jade pendant was no longer shrouded in red mist. At this moment, it appeared even more sparkling and translucent. The red glow that flowed on the petals was extremely demonic. Following Yiqing Luo's breathing. Chapter 40-41. You can take it. These 4 words surfaced in Yiqing Luo's mind. Just as she was about to take a step closer to the jade pendant. That jade pendant, which was lying quietly on the stone bench, suddenly flew up. This movement. The cherry blossom-like jade pendant turned into blossoming flower petals as it sprinkled downwards. But after a moment, Yiqing Luo's surroundings were already covered with cherry blossom rain. Yes, cherry blossom rain. The kind of cherry blossom rain which was extremely Chunibyu. It covered the sky and earth as it lingered downwards. And what made Yiqing Luo most surprised was every petal of the falling cherry blossom rain seemed to be covered in a red, watery light, and ripples spread out in the air. What situation was this? How did the jade pendant turn into a flower petal rain? Was this the Azure Dew Jade's special ability? Yiqing Luo looked at the falling cherry blossom rain in a daze. Suddenly, the extremely Chunibyu cherry blossom rain turned into a ray of red light as it instantly flowed into her body. Her eyes widened as her expression became even more dazed. But following that, there was no time for her to be dazed. The moment that Chunibyu red light flowed into her body, the thick red mist in the surroundings suddenly began to collapse. The smooth and holy stone bench suddenly exploded into pieces. Yiqing Luo retreated in shock. Her body had just moved. That body, which was originally filled with energy, seemed to have something stirring fiercely in her body. Her limbs and bones were instantly rushed into by this huge force. Buzz. His mind shook violently and a buzzing sound rang out continuously. She cried out, "Ah," as her petite body swayed and she couldn't stand steadily as she fell onto the ground. This was no longer a feeling that could be described as pain. It was as if every tendon in her body was forcefully torn apart and then stuffed with something and then stitched up again. And when the stirring feeling came, every part of her body felt like it was being pricked by needles. It was so painful that she couldn't wait to cut off all her tendons and meridians to release that swelling pain. She fell onto the ground as her body curled up. Her mouth kept making low and painful moans. If this went on, her body might not be able to withstand the pressure and explode to death. Yiqing Luo bit her lower lip as she maintained her consciousness. She must not lose herself in the pain. Once her consciousness was devoured, She might never be able to open her eyes again. Little girl Luo. Little girl Luo. Suddenly several breaths of time passed by his ears. Those cries caused her to open her eyes despite the pain. Purplish black. A patch of purplish black. It was the sky of the graveyard. Yiqing Luo's breathing tightened as her gaze wandered around. There was indeed no longer a thick red mist in all directions. Instead it was an oppressive purplish-black color. It was as if her eyes were going to be dyed purplish-black. She returned to the graveyard from the place where the artifact was placed. Perhaps it was because of the sudden change in the scene before him. The intense pain in Yiqing Luo's body stopped the teasing. It also gave her a moment to catch her breath. However, it was only for a moment. That kind of power surged through her limbs and bones. It was powerful and majestic, filling every single one of her tendons and squeezing every inch of her body. His vision became blurry and hazy again. In a trance, she vaguely saw a complicated totem on the stone door of the entrance of the cemetery. It was very familiar. Like she had seen it somewhere before. Yiqing Luo wanted to identify it seriously. Ah. Chapter 40-42. Girl Luo. Girl Luo. At the same time those calls sounded again. She opened her eyes. What entered his eyes was Old Man Song's worried face. He floated above her, floating back and forth, his mouth constantly muttering, calling out to her. Seeing Yiqing Luo open her eyes. Old Man Song was wild with joy as he swooped down and stopped beside Yiqing Luo. Luo lass. Yiqing Luo's eyelashes fluttered as her breathing stagnated for a moment. Girl Luo, what's wrong? What happened? Old Man Song saw that Yiqing Luo didn't respond for a long time and was extremely worried. Yiqing Luo wanted to respond. But as soon as he opened his mouth, the powerful energy surging in her body caused her face to turn pale. Her entire delicate body curled up a little. It was as if some kind of power was about to explode from her body. The pain was unbearable. Hear her muffled groan of pain. Old Man Song became more and more anxious. He wanted to touch her, but the spirit body passed through her body. He was so anxious that his wrinkled face was scrunched up. But Yiqing Luo's current state made her unable to answer him. Old Man Song could only return to the Azure Dew bracelet and use it to check on Yiqing Luo's body. With this investigation, Old Man Song was stunned. Little Luo, what's going on? Inside your body. How could it? Within Yiqing Luo's body, her limbs and bones, her internal organs, every meridian was filled with a thick and majestic energy. Squeezed into Yiqing Luo's body, there was not a single gap. These energies continuously intertwined with the power of the divine phoenix profound heart jade, stirring. Under such circumstances, Yiqing Luo could still maintain her consciousness? Just how strong was his willpower? Even if it was him, he wouldn't dare to say that he could endure such inhumane torture. Old Man Song was filled with shock and heartache. Girl, just how much energy did you absorb? Old Man Song used the Azure Dew bracelet and began to divide the energy within Yiqing Luo's body. But by doing this, it only slightly reduced Yiqing Luo's pain. He had to first suppress the restless power in her body. After that, he would slowly absorb it. But they were still trapped in this stone wall. How could they help Luo Yu suppress her power? For the first time, Old Man Song felt so powerless. At this moment, Old Man Song only heard a ping explosion. All of a sudden, a crack appeared above the space that was filled with dark water true qi. It was as if someone had torn a rift out of thin air. Then a purple figure descended from the sky like a god. His sleeves moved slightly. The young girl who was curling up in pain on the ground was pulled into his arms. The purple-robed man stared at the person in his arms. The girl's forehead was covered in cold sweat. Her lips were pale, but her face was abnormally flushed. The aura emanating from his body was so chaotic that it seemed like a volcano would erupt at any moment. The man's handsome face darkened. His peach blossom eyes narrowed. The corners of his eyes were cold and bloodthirsty. Lord Dizun. Old Man Song's face lit up with joy when he saw who it was. The spiritual body immediately drilled out of the Azure Dew bracelet. However, the man didn't even give him a look as he kept staring at Yiqing Luo. Chapter 40-43. If the power within Luo Lass continues to riot. Luo Lass is very likely. Possibly. At this point, Old Man Song pursed his lips and couldn't continue. Zhou Xian's face was cold as his gaze suddenly shifted towards Old Man Song. He didn't seem to move. But he waved his sleeves. Like a purple flowing cloud rolling over and over. A tyrannical profound light swept up a horrifying chi wave as it headed straight towards Old Man Tsang. Old Man Tsang's face congealed slightly. He could dodge but he didn't. He allowed that chi wave to hit his body. Bang! Old Man Tsang's spirit body swayed from the hit. The lingering white light on his body also dissipated like smoke. His spirit body also became much thinner. But Old Man Tsang's expression didn't change. He also didn't complain that his spirit body's power had been reduced by a third. If there's a next time, no matter how much Luo Air respects you, this lord will make your soul scatter. Zhou Xian said coldly, his voice seemed to be condensed with frost. So cold that it made one's heart go cold. Old Man Tsang lowered his head slightly, his voice was obviously a bit weak. This matter, it's my fault, I miscalculated the absorption rate of the Divine Phoenix Profound Jade, causing Luo Las to become like this. He should bear Zhou Xian's palm. It was indeed him who made Yiqing Luo use her own blood to open the passage in the stone wall and enter the enchantment. Only Yiqing Luo could enter this enchantment. Only Yiqing Luo could get the third divine weapon. Of course, his goal wasn't just to let Yiqing Luo get the third divine weapon. But this place. Everything here was beneficial to Yiqing Luo. Almost certainly. He could use this opportunity to let Yiqing Luo advance to the profound grade. But he miscalculated the greed of the Divine Phoenix Profound Jade. It had actually absorbed so much of the vast water chi. Plus the power of the divine weapon entering the body. It made Yiqing Luo's body completely unable to bear this burden. Old Man Tsang's guilty tone made Zhou Xian frown slightly. He stared at Old Man Tsang for a moment before quickly retracting his gaze and spitting out coldly. Scram. If it wasn't for the fact that Old Man Tsang was the object of Yiqing Luo's respect, just based on the fact that Old Man Tsang injured his little Luo heir, even if he was scared out of his wits, he would not be able to vent his anger. Old Man Tsang sensed Zhou Xian's rage, but didn't have any intention of returning to the Azure Dew bracelet. Instead, he looked worriedly at the person in his arms. Luo Las, perhaps it was the mention of Yiqing Luo's name. Curled up in Zhou Xian's arms, Yiqing Luo, who was in so much pain that her body couldn't stop trembling, suddenly clutched tightly onto Zhou Xian's lapel as her painful breathing became hurried. Zhou Xian lowered his gaze. He looked at the girl's face, which was becoming more and more abnormally red. Even his body began to turn red. She was drenched in cold sweat and her robe was soaked. This was a sign that the energy in his body was unable to calm down and was about to erupt. Yiqing Luo's body. He couldn't hold on any longer. However, even though the person in his arms was in so much pain, her hands were clutching his clothes tightly. It was as if he was trying to stop his attitude towards Old Man Tsang. Zhou Xian held her hand tightly. Looking at the person in his arms who was in pain, the frost in the depths of his obsidian eyes deepened. In the end, his gaze only coldly swept over Old Man Tsang in an extremely shallow and indifferent manner. His imposing manner was restrained by a lot. Xian. Chapter 40-44. What entered her nostrils was the man's elegant sandalwood scent. The familiar smell, the warm broad chest, made her tense nerves relax in an instant. Following that, her consciousness began to dissipate. The powerful and awe-inspiring majestic power was like the rolling waves in her body. The sweat on her forehead due to the severe pain flowed down her cheeks. Her gorgeous face was extremely pale. Her brows were tightly knitted together. Her face was full of pain. Looking at such a painful young lady, Zhou Xian's heart was also in pain. He bowed his head. The shadow blocked the worry in his dark eyes. His thin lips were printed on the young lady's lips, which were tightly bitten because of the pain. The tip of his tongue moved slightly. He picked up the young lady's self-harming behavior. He could vaguely taste the bloody smell from the young lady's lips. Zhou Xian's pupils shrank slightly. Deep in his eyes there was some heartache. The moment he kissed the young lady, Zhou Xian could clearly feel, from the young lady's mouth, there was a powerful force. He sighed softly. The tip of his tongue moved again. A drop of blood along the tip of the tongue fell into Yiqing Luo's mouth. Faintly there was a glimmer. The moment the man's blood, along Yiqing Luo's throat, slid into her body. It was like when the raging fire was burning, It was covered with a layer of coldness, relieving all her discomfort. It was like a warm spring, seeping into her limbs and bones, gently brushing over every corner of her body. In an instant, it suppressed the surging power in her body. That strand, squeezing in Yiqing Luo's body, tendons and other places, slowly followed the power brought by that drop of blood and calmed down. Not like the squeezing, fighting and entanglement earlier, but extremely smoothly spread out in Yiqing Luo's body. Yiqing Luo's fingers, which were holding Dmo Xian's clothes, slowly loosened. Her half-hazy eyes blinked slightly. The cold sweat on her eyelashes was blinked off, clearly met with the man's doting and warm eyes. "Don't be anxious." Dmo Xian spoke in a gentle voice as if the warmth seeped into Yiqing Luo's heart. Her ear was pressed against the man's chest. Listening to the sound of his heartbeat made one feel at ease. "Follow your most direct reaction. I believe Lil Luo can definitely do it." The man's gentle voice was very close. She didn't understand the meaning of Dmo Xian's words. Before he could ask, suddenly her delicate body shook violently. Dense and majestic dark force was circulating rapidly in his body. All the muscles and bones in his body were swept away. There were huge waves surging within Yiqing Luo's body, slapping against it continuously. The sudden fluctuation of energy. It didn't make her feel the unbearable pain she had just now. Instead, it was as if something was colliding, slapping and sweeping away again and again. Slowly the door opened. The power released by the divine phoenix profound heart jade began to slowly absorb the dark force that collided with it. Wave after wave. Round and round. After an unknown amount of time. Finally, in Yiqing Luo's mind, no, more accurately from head to toe, a muffled boom came from the air around him. Yiqing Luo's vibrating dark force suddenly dispersed in all directions. It was like a magnificent red sunset rippling in the air. Her aura gradually changed. The fluctuation of the profound grade was also surging continuously. Sage profound 5th grade, sage profound 6th grade. The profound grade's aura was still surging. Chapter 40-45. If there were other people around, they would definitely be scared out of their wits by the scene in front of them. Perhaps if the World Mercenary Group's brothers or familiar elders saw this, they would be shocked. For example, Old Man Song, who was floating by the side, was so shocked that his jaw almost dropped to the ground. He knew how abnormal Yiqing Luo was. But he didn't expect Yiqing Luo to be so abnormal. Abnormal to the extent that it couldn't even be described. If it was previously in Nirvana realm, Yiqing Luo's various kinds of advancement made everyone excited. But now in the Earth realm, the higher the profound grade, the harder it was to advance. Especially the profound grade of the virtuous profound grade. It was equivalent to the chance of advancement from 80% to 20%. Among these 20%, those who could advance successfully might have spent hundreds of years and expended huge amounts of resources. But how long had it been since Yiqing Luo advanced to virtuous profound 4th grade? Now she had advanced again. And it was another advancement. This was comparable to the speed of lightning. Old Man Song expressed that every time he saw last Luo's advancement he would be shocked. Probably the next time, he would be numb. Seeing that Yiqing Luo was obviously out of danger, Old Man Song raised his hand and pressed on his scattered spiritual body as he sighed helplessly. His figure swayed. The spiritual body returned to the azure dew bracelet. The advancement of profound energy was still lingering. Yiqing Luo's energy had completely merged with the divine phoenix profound heart jade and could be released anytime and anywhere. After the advancement, the energy gradually settled down. Yiqing Luo only felt comfortable. After she opened her eyes, in front of her was a hazy fog. A bundle of warmth enveloped her body. She blinked her eyes to clear her mind. She could see clearly that she was completely naked, soaking in a hot spring. The elegant floral fragrance mixed with a faint medicinal fragrance entered her nose. Yiqing Luo raised her hand and touched the water surface. Where was this place? Did Dmo Xian bring her here? He seemed to remember. Before the advancement she saw Dmo Xian. And because Dmo Xian came in time, only then was she able to suppress the violent energy in her body. Then she was able to advance. It seemed. Was it because of a drop of his blood? He was still pondering. Suddenly he felt something warm beside his ear. A pair of broad and thick palms landed on her shoulders. In an instant his skin felt as if it had been set on fire and it was burning hot. "You're finally awake." The man's low and hoarse voice was as mellow as fine wine. In this warm and comfortable hot spring, his voice was even more intoxicating. Yiqing Luo didn't move as she held the man's arm and leaned back. The fog obscured the unadorned face, which was still exceedingly beautiful. Dmo Xian's figure pressed down slightly as his lips curled into a smile. "This time's advancement seems to be rather strenuous for you." Yiqing Luo raised her hand and blocked in front of her. She also blocked the man's kiss. The water droplets splashed onto Dmo Xian's body. The man's thin lips were also imprinted on her palm. There was a slight burning sensation. Dmo Xian didn't mind as he raised his hand and caught the little hand that he had kissed. Then he brought it to his lips and kissed it. His thin lips curled into a smile with some unclear meaning. "Do you know how long you took to advance this time?" Yiqing Luo felt a little itchy and her delicate body was also trembling slightly because of the man's indistinct teasing. Somehow she felt that there was an inexplicable displeasure in the man's tone. Chapter 40-46. Yiqing Luo wanted to look back at Dmo Xian's expression. But the man's hands were still on her shoulders. She couldn't move her body. She pursed her pink lips and lifted her hand from the hot spring. Her hand was stained with water droplets and held the man's big palm. The girl's clear voice was very sweet. "Thank you, Xian, for staying by my side during my advancement." Dmo Xian chuckled as he leaned forward a little. Almost his entire face was pillowed on her bare shoulder. His warm breath sprayed on her skin. The man's deep voice was magnetic and alluring. "I've stayed by your side for 3 days and just a word of thanks and you're going to dismiss me?" Following his words, his dark eyes were filled with a pitch-black darkness. Slightly tilting his eyes, his lips were on the girl's earlobe. And at the same time, the girl was tickled by the man's hair and looked at him sideways. His lips were on hers. The girl's fragrance was mixed with the fragrance of medicine, which was particularly tempting. Dmo Xian's deep as ink eyes dimmed. And Yiqing Luo at the moment when their lips touched. She only felt the temperature of the hot spring suddenly rose. She was just about to move away. But her head was clasped by the man's big palm. The overbearing kiss fell on her lips fiercely. From this angle, Yiqing Luo felt that the man's eyes were getting more and more charming. But Dmo Xian quickly moved his lips away. His handsome and elegant face was faintly tainted with a trace of bewitching evil charm. His slender fingers brushed his thin lips. "I'm very satisfied with this way of expressing my thanks." Yiqing Luo's face suddenly flushed red. Dmo Xian narrowed his peach blossom eyes, looked at her blushing face, chuckled lightly and drew closer. "Do you know why you spent 3 days before you succeeded in your advancement?" That scorching hot airflow poured down. Yiqing Luo felt a kind of electric shock. Her body was numb for a moment. The temperature was also rising. Not only her face was boiling hot. Even her body started to heat up. She could tell that the displeasure in Dmo Xian's tone was related to this advancement. Her delicate body trembled and moved slightly, trying to pull away the distance between her and Dmo Xian. However, the man had no intention of letting Yiqing Luo escape. His slender fingers traced the contours of her shoulders and circled around her black hair that was hanging down her shoulders. Her black hair was twined around her finger. From time to time, it would brush against her delicate skin. The tip of Yiqing Luo's ears were boiling hot. Her pink lips quivered as if she understood the reason why Dmo Xian was angry. However, before she could open her mouth, Dmo Xian's hand suddenly wrapped around her body and he suddenly scooped her up. In the hot spring, her naked body was pulled into the man's arms. The fragrant water soaked the man's luxurious purple robe. Her naked body was also tightly covered by the man's robe. Beside her ear was the man's cold and mocking voice. "You need 3 days to successfully advance and wake up. This means that your advancement this time is not because of your strength, but because you have reached the opportunity to advance. Do you know the reason for your advancement?" He suddenly lowered his voice and his tone was slightly cold. How would Yiqing Luo not understand the meaning behind Dmo Xian's words? Her body trembled and her little hand climbed onto the man's shirt, wanting to speak. Chapter 40-47. "So, this time you spent an entire 3 days to completely digest the energy in your body." The voice beside her ear was very low. The distance was very close. His breath was also very close. But Yiqing Luo had no romantic thoughts. With a start, her arms stretched out from the man's purple robe and circled around his neck, acting coquettishly. I know I'm wrong. It's my fault. I shouldn't have allowed the divine phoenix profound jade to absorb so much azure qi. This time's advancement. It was indeed taxing on her. She didn't expect that after releasing the divine phoenix profound jade's energy, the divine phoenix profound jade would be so happy with the azure qi. As if it couldn't wait to absorb all the qi in the spirit gathering array. Finally, the third divine artifact automatically integrated into her body and signed a soul contract with her. Thus, she also inherited half of the third divine artifact's energy. She had just changed her body. How could she withstand the dual energy of the divine phoenix profound jade and the divine artifact? Luckily, Zhou Xian came just in time. Thinking of this, she suddenly raised her eyes slightly brightened, looking at his gaze with some curiosity and some sparkles. Xian, your blood. Why can it suppress the energy in my body? The energy in her body settled down and slowly merged with her, allowing her to advance. She could be sure, it had something to do with the drop of blood that Zhou Xian fed into her mouth. Even at that time, her consciousness was already blurry because of the restless energy in her body. She could also roughly feel that when the man kissed her, that drop of blood slipped in. The young lady probably didn't know. This action of hers revealed so much. When the young lady lifted her jade lotus, the man only slightly lowered his eyes. He could clearly see the naked body under the purple robe in his arms. That delicate white skin instantly filled Zhou Xian's eyes. Zhou Xian's eyes dimmed even more. Indistinctly, there was a red glow of passion. He smiled, slightly lowered his eyes, smiling seductively. Want to know? Yiqing Luo nodded. Zhou Xian's smile deepened, his head tilted down a little. Their four eyes met. From this angle he could see the beauty of the young lady in full view. His eyes flashed a dangerous deep meaning. His smile had a different meaning to it. The man's gaze was too scorching. How could Yiqing Luo not understand? She shrunk into the man's embrace to cover her body. Seeing her actions, Zhou Xian only smiled. That smile was dangerous and demonic. Not only did my blood prevent your body from exploding, it also allowed you to ascend to the Sage Profound 6th grade. How will you repay me? His low and hoarse voice was seductive and bewitching. He even deliberately lowered his voice to make it sound even more magnetic. Nestled in Zhou Xian's arms, Yiqing Luo felt her legs wobbling. Zhou Xian's brows curled up slightly as the corners of his eyes curled up. Why don't you pay with your body? As soon as he finished speaking, he kissed her. His warm lips seemed to want to devour her completely. Her black hair fell on her exposed skin. Yiqing Luo's breathing shuddered and became heavier. Her delicate body, which had shrunk under the purple robe, trembled slightly because of the man's seductive movements. The numb girl was still struggling. You promised me that you wouldn't touch me during this period of time. Chapter 40-48. Yiqing Luo's beautiful face was stained with a thin shade of red. Her eyes were misty like spring water already aroused. Her voice was like a hook with a light pant. You're now going back on your words. Zhou Xian suddenly stopped his actions. Half propped up on Yiqing Luo's body, their four eyes met. The man's deep as ink eyes were like a whirlpool swallowing her whole. Just when Yiqing Luo was almost bewitched by Zhou Xian's deep peach blossom eyes. Zhou Xian's thin lips curled into a devilish smile. Plus that face. This smile under this situation. It simply made one's whole body numb. Like an electric shock. Hasn't the imposter's matter been settled? Zhou Xian loved the expression of the person in his arms. He loved Lil Luo, the lovable look because of him. The fire in Zhou Xian's eyes burned even more. The young lady had no resistance, already lying beside the hot spring on the smooth huge stone, along with her purple robe. Yiqing Luo grabbed his wrist. The scorching heat seemed to be able to burn her. The scorching heat made her body heat up. What kind of solution is that? Yiqing Luo's eyes glowed brightly like stars, dazzling and resplendent. Zhou Xian suddenly lowered his body. The distance between the two was so close that the tip of their nose was touching. The imposter's identity is already clear. If he still has a brain, he will not use my identity to appear in front of the public. Zhou Xian explained with a reasonable attitude. Talking at such a close distance. His aura permeated everything about her. Dmo Xian's action was obviously to seduce her. Yiqing Luo almost couldn't control herself. The hand which was pressing on Dmo Xian's wrist tightened. I don't know who he is. The man suddenly bent his head, kissing her again. The slightly dangerous voice and overbearing action gave her no room to reject. Is my charm not enough, or Lil Luo, her has already floated? What happened to liking my face? Why, my face is right in front of you, how can you still think of other men? The punitive kiss, slightly heavy, even bit her. Yiqing Luo subconsciously moaned, crying out injustice in her heart. She was only curious who was the impostor of Dmo Xian. After all, he was able to imitate Dmo Xian to perfection. It was hard to find such a person in the world. How did pure curiosity turn into thinking about other men? Before she could explain herself, the man stopped her. The man moved his hands up and down as he said, "Besides, this is your way of repaying me, isn't it?" Yiqing Luo, who had been unconscious for an unknown period of time. She clenched her fists. Her whole body was sore and she bit her lips angrily. Men were indeed all stinking liars. Men are all pig trotters. Men. Throw away the pig trotters. I don't want it anymore. Whoever wants it can take it. Yiqing Luo propped up her sore body and got up. Her body had already been cleaned up and she was wearing neatly dressed undergarments. But Dmo Xian was nowhere to be seen. Yiqing Luo pursed her lips and gave a heavy humph. The previous few times after torturing her, the system still knew to serve her. He had only served her a few times. But now he was gone. Amen. Cough, cough, cough. In the room an awkward cough was heard. Chapter 40-49. Although Old Man Song was ridiculing him, but in his heart he was extremely happy. Her face was full of smiles. Girl Luo was really, only in front of the venerable sovereign would she show her feminine side. Only then would she be more real. Old Man Song was truly rejoicing. For a Dmo Xian to appear by Yiqing Luo's side. He was also thankful from the bottom of his heart that Dmo Xian had appeared in Yiqing Luo's life. Old Song. Hearing Old Man Song's voice, the blush on Yiqing Luo's face stiffened. With a swish, her face turned even redder. When did you come out? Previously her face was blushing. That was the color of spring. Now Yiqing Luo's cheeks were flushed red. Old Man Song's spiritual body floated over. Dizun has something to deal with. He'll be back in 2 hours. I'll stay here to watch over you. In other words, Old Man Song had been in the room for a long time. After she woke up, her heart was full of cursing Dmo Xian's beastly behavior last night, totally not noticing it at all. She had lost all her face. Yiqing Luo wanted to cover her face and howl. But when he saw Old Man Song's spiritual body, he was startled for a moment. What's going on with you? Why is your spirit body so weak? In the cave. Old Man Song's spirit body was still very sturdy. Why did he look so thin and transparent, as if a gust of wind could blow him away? Old Man Song lowered his head, raised his hands and looked at himself. He smiled as he shook his head. It's nothing, it's just a little accident. I'll be able to recover after resting in the Azure Dew bracelet for a period of time. As he spoke, he floated to the side of the bed. Get up. Dizun has prepared lunch for you in the kitchen. Yiqing Luo's slender brows creased slightly as the smile on her face faded and her expression turned grave. You are like this because of Zhou Xian? With Old Man Song's strength, plus the fact that he could enter and exit the Azure Dew bracelet at any time. How could he be injured by someone? Even his spirit body had become weak? Unless it was Old Man Song who volunteered. In addition, after Old Man Song heard her question, he didn't directly answer it and even deliberately changed the topic. Yiqing Luo was certain. The person who turned Old Man Song into such a state was definitely someone she knew. Then only Dmo Xian could injure Old Man Song. After confirming this point, Yiqing Luo went through the entire incident in her mind. He could also guess the reason why Dmo Xian made a move against Old Man Song. Yiqing Luo pursed her lips tightly and lowered her head guiltily. Old Man Song, I'm sorry. It was because of her that Dmo Xian took action. Silly girl, why are you apologizing to me? I don't blame you or the Overlord. Old Man Song stretched out his hand and made a gesture of slapping Yiqing Luo's head across the air. He smiled helplessly and shook his head. You almost exploded and died because the power in your body was too strong. This is indeed my fault. Dizun should blame me. It's not your fault. Yiqing Luo leaned against the headboard and lowered her eyes. I already have the whereabouts of the third divine relic. Naturally I will not give up. Even if you don't tell me how to open the door of the passage, I will find a way to enter the enchantment of the divine relic. Furthermore, if I had been able to control the divine phoenix profound heart jade, I would not have been in such a dire situation. So, in the end it was all because of her greed that caused her to become like this. Old Man Song looked at Yiqing Luo's slightly gloomy aura and his eyes flashed with some emotion. Chapter 40-50. His tone was obviously a little apprehensive. He seemed to be suppressing some sort of emotion. Yiqing Luo raised her eyes. Her bright as ink eyes quietly looked at Old Man Song. Those clean, pure eyes. This caused Old Man Song's heart to grow increasingly apprehensive. When he raised his head to meet Yiqing Luo's gaze, he was rather cautious. Old Man Song, you know my personality very well, don't you? Yiqing Luo's lips curled upwards as her brows carried a smile. I believe you, I should have told you these 4 words many times. He answered without hesitation. Just like in the cave, when he suggested for Yiqing Luo to drip her blood into the eyes of the mural. Without any hesitation he did as he was told. Just because Yiqing Luo did it. That was why she was so close to bursting from the power, causing her body to explode and die. Actually, he had his own selfish motives. Old Man Song pursed his lips into a straight line. His aged face was filled with complicated emotions. The gaze he shot towards Yiqing Luo was filled with guilt. Old Man Song's mood changed. Yiqing Luo naturally felt it and saw it in her eyes. Old Man Song, will you hurt me? She was still smiling and her eyes were gentle. Old Man Song didn't even think about it and reflexively replied, I won't. Yiqing Luo smiled. Isn't that enough? No matter what secrets you want to hide, as long as you treat me sincerely, that's enough. She never doubted Old Man Song's sincerity towards her. All along, it had always been Old Man Song who was always by her side. Back then he had even wanted to sacrifice himself to save her. So what if he had a lot of secrets? It was not important. The Azure Dew bracelet was no ordinary object. As the artifact spirit of the Azure Dew bracelet, how could it be an ordinary person? Since he had chosen to contract the Azure Dew bracelet, he chose Old Man Song. She would trust Old Man Song unconditionally. He believed it too. When her strength reached the level that Old Man Song approved of, Old Man Song would definitely take the initiative to tell her all the secrets. Las Luo. He had to admit that Yiqing Luo's words made his desolate heart feel a sense of warmth. He was a spiritual body. There is no heart. However, the warmth of his body and the uncontrollable shaking of his body were so real. Old Man Song let out a low laugh. His somewhat transparent, glowing hand covered his face, covering his slightly reddened eyes. He chuckled softly as though he had finally let go of the boulder that had been weighing down on his heart. His voice was filled with ease. Hiding a secret. How did you detect it? It's very obvious. Yiqing Luo looked at him. Perhaps, you've never thought of hiding it from me, isn't it? Indeed. Old Man Song let go of his hand and met Yiqing Luo's gaze. These matters will eventually have to be told to you, it's just that, now is not the time. I know. Yiqing Luo had no intention to interrogate him. I believe in you just like how you believe in me, that's enough. The smile on Old Man Song's face grew even wider. That old face was covered with a relaxed and sincere smile. Under this warm and kind smile, his spirit body slowly floated into the Azure Dew bracelet. Yiqing Luo lowered her eyes as she caressed the bracelet on her wrist and looked at it for a long time. Afterwards she laughed lightly, lifted the quilt and got up from the bed. Regarding Old Man Song, she didn't intend to question or satisfy her curiosity. The secret that Old Man Song was hiding was related to the sovereign of the divine emperors.